I'm going to make a new deadline of about 10 or 12 days from today. There's no reason in waiting. There's no reason in waiting. It's 50 days. I want to be generous, but we just don't see any progress being made.
Wow. That's just, it's hard for me to even fathom what in the world just happened. That is moments ago. President Trump, who was live with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, talking about a number of things. And then all of a sudden he drops this bombshell on top of us that this 50-day deadline ultimatum, which was supposed to have expired sometime in September, now all of a sudden he's like, you know what, just forget about that. You know, it wasn't that long ago that we were talking about what does that deadline even mean and what would happen at the end of this 50 days, because none of the other ones have worked out, and more on that shortly. But and we still have to ask the same question. What is this one going to be doing? And what is the intent behind President Trump? What does he hope to accomplish with this? He says, "I'm getting tired of this, and it's not going anywhere, and I'm really disappointed with Putin." In fact, actually, just before this, that particular view comment he made there, which was sitting next to Keir Starmer, as they were getting ready to walk into the building, he said, "Look, I thought we've had this wrapped up already before this, 4 or 5 times."
I would have said 5 times we would have had a deal. I've spoken to President Putin a lot. I got along with him very well. But 5 times, and every time 4 times maybe. But we've had discussions. You and I have had discussions. Yeah. We thought we had that settled numerous times. And then President Putin goes out and starts launching rockets into some city like Kiev, and kills a lot of people in a nursing home or whatever. You have bodies lying all over the street. And I say, that's not the way to do it. So we'll see what happens with that. I'm very disappointed. I'm disappointed in President Putin. Very disappointed in him. So we're going to have to look, and I'm going to reduce that 50 days that I gave him to a lesser number, because I think I already know the answer what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think you should already know the answer to what's happened, because you've been told that by the Russian president every time you talk to him. Listen, folks, I'm going to provide some analysis here like we always do, based on what people are saying, based on what's happening on the ground. That's just kind of how we operate here. But you got to stop and pause for a minute. And I'm not at all exaggerating here. I'm not joking. I'm not trying to be insulting or pejorative, etc. I think that we have to consider there could be something cognitively wrong with President Trump. This is irrational behavior. It doesn't appear tied to any kind of coherent thought process, no kind of strategy. We've been bereft of that for, well, actually years, not just in the current administration. But this just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I mean, for him to sit there and say in that soundbite, I thought we had a deal 5 times. Well, maybe 4 times. Well, which is it? Is it 5 times or is it 4 times? But of course, even more fundamental than that, what do you mean you thought you had a deal? I mean, let's just look at the last time they publicly spoke, which is on July the 2nd or 3rd, I think July 3rd. You had the readouts come from both sides. Trump calls saying he wants a 30-day unconditional ceasefire. Vladimir Putin very politely talks to him. They have a conversation. Putin unambiguously in the readout, very detailed readout after the Kremlin, said, we told him we'll not do this until we have everything accounted for that we believe we have to have. All the root causes have to be addressed. We will accomplish all of our objectives, either militarily or diplomatically, but one way or the other, that's what we're going to have. But we will not bend on any of our conditions. That was publicly stated by the Kremlin hours after the phone call. Upon what basis, then, would you think, I thought we had this solved? Now, the only way you could think we had it solved is if you both agreed that the Ukraine was going to make a negotiated settlement and stop the war at the current place where they're at right now, line of contact, and then concede to Russia's demands, which of course would require them to withdraw from considerable territory they currently own, which is obviously something to be, at the moment, is impossible for the Ukraine side to do, or impossible for them to do. Not that they can't, but that they have chosen politically not to, because they believe it would be a poison pill, and politically it would be, but it would also be effective and actually bring the war to an end. But the Ukraine side doesn't want to do that. They want to keep fighting. Okay, fair enough as far as it goes. I think that's a terrible idea. I think it's just catastrophic, if not destructive, to the Ukraine side to continue holding that position. But they are a sovereign country. They can do what they want. But that is the Ukraine stated position. They won't even consider that. That is the Russian stated position. They won't stop unless they get that. Upon what basis, then, can the President of the United States actually say 4 or 5 times he thought we had a deal? You couldn't possibly have thought you had a deal when the two sides have been getting further and further apart. They've had 3 direct negotiation rounds in Istanbul between Russia and Ukraine. Every time the distance gets further. The last one was a mockery of diplomacy, and neither side did anything other than want to have the show of that they were showing up for their own domestic internal purposes, or even some other diplomatic reasons for some of their allies around the world. But there was nothing even remotely close to an actual discussion to bring that to an end. So for President Trump then to say, I thought we had a deal, is either a lie or it's evidence that there's some kind of a cognitive problem, because there is no evidence. And in fact, there's, to the contrary, there is considerable evidence that nobody is close to agreeing to what the other side requires to end the fighting. So you can't say we thought we had a deal. It just doesn't exist. But he went on. In fact, actually, before I go on from there, he ends up by saying that, every time we talked, and then all of a sudden rockets start flying. Well, again, folks, Russia has been unequivocal and very open about saying we will not stop fighting until our version of the core causes of this war, the root causes, have been addressed, past tense, ed, past tense, until it's been done. So we're going to talk, we're going to continue to negotiate, but only in the context of the fighting. And they have been I can only imagine that behind the cameras, and when these personal phone calls happen, I can't imagine that Putin wouldn't say it in even more strong terms or more unambiguous terms. They're definitely doing it publicly. So whatever is said behind scenes, it certainly isn't going to be contravened by what they say in those public forums and then what they do on the battlefield. So nobody could be surprised when rockets fall the day after, because they're falling every day. So for Trump again to say, I'm upset, because that would imply that I had an agreement with Vladimir Putin. He told me he would stop, and then all of a sudden later that day, missiles are fired. That's the only context that statement can be made with any kind of credibility. I thought we had a deal, but I now wasn't on the phone call. I don't have any access to insider information and classified or whatever. So I guess it's theoretically possible that did happen, that Trump said, okay, or Putin said, okay, I'll stop firing missiles. And then he did. I just think that the possibility of that is a fraction of 1%, and really it's not even that. It's more like a theoretical possibility, because there's no reason for Russia to say anything besides what they have said in public, in private. So that is yet another evidence that something is not right here. And then when Trump says at the end of that, I think I know what's going to happen. Yeah, I don't know that he does know what's going to happen. That's one of my other problems. He has in his mind that we know what's going to happen. And I only can imagine he's talking about the sanctions, the 100% tariffs, secondary sanctions that he had referred to back when he made the original 50-day ultimatum earlier this month. And that is unlikely to work. That is not going to be very successful, because 2 of the key recipients, which we've shown you, Lindsey Graham has been almost lusting to have these things thrown out there on China. You had Lindsey Graham wanting 500% tariffs on China. So that's not going to happen. But then Trump apparently said, well, all right, well, let's go 100%. Well, like that's any better. We've already tried that with China, folks. You remember earlier in the administration when we had, I think it was 145% tariffs on China, and that was bad for our economy. Now you want to slap 100% on China again? Now, why do you think that just a few weeks later, A number of weeks later, it's going to be effective now when it wasn't before. And now you want to add India to the mix, and you want to add Brazil to the mix. So you're literally going after the very core of BRICS here. And somehow you think that's going to work. Already, there has been a significant shift in the global economic power from the G7, from the Western world, into the BRICS area, that which continues to expand. More people are starting to join it. More people are in the process of joining it. And this kind of thing will only accelerate that shift. So I doubt very seriously it's going to happen. And it all works negative to us, both long-term and near term. So I don't know what he means or what he thinks he's meaning when he says this is going to have, I know where this is going to go, because I don't think that it does. He may know where he thinks it's going to go. And if anyone has any fantasies that this is going to cause Russia to change course, I have to keep saying it. That's detached from reality. There is no evidence that there's any possibility that these threats of another sanction after 18 full rounds have already happened, that somehow you think this one is going to make a difference when none of the others did. And you say that with such confidence. Well, we'll see what's going to happen, because going back to that conversation there's one more thing Trump said, which deserves some scrutiny.
You know, Russia could be so rich right now. Instead, they spend all their money on war. They spend everything on war and killing people, and it doesn't make sense to me. I thought he would want to end this thing quickly. I really felt it was going to end, but every time I think it's going to end, he kills people.
Could a meeting help, and are you considering it? Has been proposed?
I don't know. I'm not, I'm not so interested in talking anymore.
Even the way he said that was so like ran out of energy. I just don't want to talk anymore. Well, there hasn't been any talks at all yet, not any substantive ones, because the Russians are saying, hey, we're willing to do this stuff. We're willing to end this diplomatically again. They've been doing that. There have been many diplomatic off-ramps offered going back to 2015, 2021, 2022, and so forth. We've talked about those a number of times. Now then, here's one more. And every time we don't take the off-ramp, the war continues. And every time the war continues, more Ukrainians die, more Ukrainian cities are turned to dust, and more Ukrainian territory gets taken over by the Russians. And that path continues on to this day. And every time you lose something, it's irrecoverable. It's not going back. And the longer we keep waiting, Russian boots keep coming and more Ukrainian territory. And now we're still in the same situation here. And when he says there that, I keep talking, I'm tired of talking, they could be so rich, I thought we'd have a deal by now. That implies that he knows absolutely nothing about why Russia's fighting, about why they're not worried about, quote, getting rich and making lots of money. They do have that interest. Every country does. They want their economy to do well. They're working many ways to try and do that. They were in the days before the war started as well. Everybody wants their economy to do better. Russia's no different. But what is different about Russia is where the priorities lie. And the issues on the table for Russia, what they call the root causes, are existential to them, and that transcends money. So Russia's not going to take a course that could lead them to cash if it leads to their security dilemma, where it leads them to the situation where their security is at risk and that they are vulnerable to the West. Then there's no point in having a lot of money from the Russian perspective if their security is not guaranteed, i.e., if NATO is inside of Ukraine. Now, NATO has been inside of Ukraine for many, many years in name, if not in fact. In reality on the ground, in terms of NATO exercises, NATO troops are there, NATO training, definitely NATO arms, ammunition, all that stuff. So there's been the de facto situation, just not in name. But obviously the whole thing started because there was a desire to get NATO there in name. And even to this day, still sitting on the books, there's still this idea that NATO will eventually be I think irrevocably or irretrievable, something like that. We keep saying it's inevitable. They will be in NATO someday. That's still on the books. So it hasn't been taken off. So Russia has no incentive whatsoever to stop fighting, no matter how much it costs them. as long as that continues, as long as that path stays open. And for Trump not to understand that is puzzling. It's one thing if you can say, well, I just don't agree with it. I understand it, but I don't agree with it. I think they're wrong. It's a separate thing for you to say, I don't understand. I don't understand why they're not prioritizing making money and not worrying about the security stuff. If you know anything about Russians, you know that is a profoundly important thing, as it would be for us. We've said this several times, but it bears repeating here. If this was China or Russia trying to have a military alliance and helping out Canada or Mexico on our border, wanted to have a military alliance, we'd be losing our stuff, folks. We'd be going crazy, much worse than what the Russians have done. There's no way on God's earth that we would sit passively by and allow that. So if you say, hey, but America, you could make more money if the China or Russia had an alliance on one of your north or south neighbor, we wouldn't care. It wouldn't make any difference how much money we could get if there was if our security was now vulnerable on our own border. We would never, ever tolerate that. So how can you claim you don't understand how the Russians are reacting the same way you would and that I would? Because I would certainly react that way. I can promise you. I wouldn't sit passively by and let that happen. I would do everything I could to prevent a military alliance against a potential adversary on my border that doesn't exist presently. But he's not the only one. Now, this was really, I guess we could have said that this was signaled ahead of time. Probably it was intended this way because yesterday, Secretary of State Rubio kind of gave a little bit of a foretaste.
And he's done everything possible to bring it to an end. I think he's growing increasingly frustrated that despite having very good interactions with Vladimir Putin and phone calls, it never leads to anything. So the time has come for some action here, and I think the president has made that abundantly clear. He's losing his patience. He's losing his willingness to continue to wait for the Russian side to do something here to bring an end to this war. That wasn't his war, but he wants to see it come to an end.
What do you mean he's losing his patience? See, that has this uncomfortable sound that I'm the parent here. I've told you, teenager, one time too many. Here's the deal. And now you haven't responded. So go to your room or you're grounded. Something like that. It has that kind of vibe to it. And Russia's not a teenager. They're not going to respond to this as well, and even Russia has to be going, what in the hell are you guys doing? What does the word of America means? And this is, by the way, applies to a lot more than just Russia, because I promise you, people all over the world are going, hang on, what does Trump even mean? What does the United States even mean when they give a deadline for anything? I mean, look, we started off, just run down the list. Before he takes office, Trump is going to have this solved. 24 hours after he gets into office, he's going to have it solved. 100 days, he's going to have it solved. Days from walking away, not weeks, not months, days. And then it was 2 weeks. And then it was 50 days. Now it's 10 to 12 days. What the hell, man? What does America mean? Our word right now means nothing. Nothing. And I know that there are those, and Lindsey Graham being one of them, that wants to zero in on one deadline that was allegedly met, and that was the one against Iran, where Trump said, you got 60 days to make a deal, and then on day 61, there was a bombing. I think that was exploited by Israel. I had nothing to do with Trump. Trump didn't do anything. We didn't attack Iran, at least not directly. But I think that he seized on that because it makes him look tough. It makes him look good. I think that Israel saw that day and they circled that 61st day on their calendar and said, we're going to exploit that and say, yeah, we're in lockstep with President Trump. And then I think they talked him into it. And that's exactly what did happen. Not because Trump's word meant anything, but because our ally in the Middle East, Israel, saw an opening that worked on their advantage. And then they talked Trump into it. But everything about Russia has meant nothing. It hasn't meant anything. The deadlines have come and gone, then changed. I mean, you even go to the one with Iran, really, because he had said right before that, I'm going to make a decision on what I'm going to do in 2 weeks. And then it was 3 or 4 days later that he actually attacked. So his word meant nothing there either. Who can take us at our word? And listen, for those of you who want to say, yeah, but see, that's the cool thing because it's the madman theory, right? So the opposition never knows what Trump means, so they better make a deal. Well, it doesn't work out that way, does it? It hasn't worked out that way. All of these so-called madman deals, and I think I'm starting to believe a little more about the madman portion of this. None of them have caused Russia to flinch an ounce. Nothing has changed in any of these. This whole thing from the beginning, we're now over 6 months. Russia hasn't changed a whit. So upon what basis then, my friend, do you say, yes, it's the so-called madman theory, like Trump's really brilliant or something, when he hasn't brought anything to fruition at all? Russia hasn't changed at all, and there's no evidence that they're going to. And so now here's Rubio talking about, well, we've lost our patience. Well, patience at what? Because you also, circling back to the beginning there, you have to have an objective in mind, and you have to have some kind of rational idea behind it of why the Russians should do what you say, whether that's because you have some kind of pain point that you can pressure them on to compel it, or you can offer some diplomatic off-ramp that gives them something that they want, so kind of a win-win deal, which gives them incentive and motivation to do so. Now, that's obviously very high price, so we don't want to go down that path. But since you can't try the pressure path, that's tried that 18 times, and it hasn't worked. All these deadlines, they haven't worked. Nothing has changed Russian. So upon what basis do you, quote, lose patience? That's a very valid question that needs to be answered. But one person who's not going to be answering that, and who probably couldn't be any happier, other than maybe Lindsey Graham. I haven't seen his comments yet. I can't imagine how thrilled he is. But his comrade there, I think, General Jack Keir, seems almost jitty.
The president has come to the conclusion that diplomacy is failing, and he's willing to turn towards confrontation. So he's strengthening Ukraine's ability to defend itself. Meanwhile, all during these negotiations, Putin actually escalated the war, particularly against the civilians in Ukraine, hitting those major cities. Our audience has seen that every single day, sometimes hundreds of drones and very accurate ballistic missiles, which cause casualties. So increasing Ukraine's ability to defend against that, and it goes unmentioned at times because we have a tendency to talk about what's happening on the battlefield. Over 13,000 Ukrainian citizens have died in this war. And Putin is committing a war crime every single day when he targets civilians with no military targets there whatsoever. So the major inflection point has taken place. Confrontation, strengthening Ukraine's ability to defend, and also looks like in several days we'll find ourselves with secondary sanctions being imposed on Russia. They already have serious economic issues, and this will add to that. Does that get them back to the negotiating table? We don't know, but we know what has not worked, and diplomacy hasn't worked, and so give this a try.
Okay, let's just take that last part there. Diplomacy hasn't worked. Let's give this a try. Now, I just laid out for you in graphic detail right before that clip what actually hasn't worked, and it wasn't diplomacy. It was us trying to lecture Russia and telling them to take action that would benefit us and would benefit Kiev and would disadvantage the side with the most power, and somehow they didn't do it. That's not diplomacy, folks. You have not even attempted diplomacy, much less exhausted it. Because right now, in practice, what Jack Keir and all those who agree with him are saying what diplomacy is I gave instructions and Russia didn't follow them. So now we're going to move to confrontation. Do you really want to do that? Do you really want to go into confrontation with Russia? Is that really what you're trying to do? Of course, this is coming in context here, and you got to understand how things look from the Russian side. Number one, our word means nothing. You keep giving all these dates and deadlines, and they don't have any actual meaning on the ground. They'll shift and change like the wind. And then we also have action. So you have the words of American general recently, General Donahue, who talked about how easy it would be and how fast we could take down Kaliningrad, which is where Russia has some nuclear bombers, and we could take that down. So we're directly threatening part of their nuclear triad and their defensive ability. That got notice, as it would with us if somebody was talking about taking down another. Say, for example, Diego Garcia. If China comes out or Russia comes out and says, hey, we have a plan, we could destroy Diego Garcia really fast. That would get some attention in Washington, not something that would make us go, oh, okay, well, I guess we better not do whatever it is you don't want us to do. I mean, that's it's a mocking thing that I'm doing with what Jack Keir said, because that's the reality. He's actually wanting Russia to do what I just mockingly displayed there. And it's so pathetic that it's like, wait, and so you want to move to a confrontational situation with Russia? You want to escalate things up here? Because let me just categorically tell you, if Trump does exactly what he has threatened to do and brings 100% secondary tariffs on all those countries that he just mentioned, number one, you have to also sanction Europe because Europe gets a lot of energy. Part of these sanctions specifically are about anyone who gets Russian energy. Well, there's a bunch of people in Western Europe that get energy from Russia still. I know a lot of people don't recognize that, but that's true. So you're either going to have to sanction everybody or just say, well, okay, we're only going to sanction the people we don't like, which of course is no problem for this administration. They don't have to be consistent with anything, or it has any kind of actual value. And so, but you are talking about sanctioning China, India, Brazil, and quite a few other places as well. And that's just not going to fly. And so you want to have a confrontation where you're turning other people potentially against us, and that you're thinking that Russia is just going to sit passively by and do nothing. I just don't understand what's going on. And by the way, back to Rubio for a second. He's in his clip that we just showed there, and also was echoed by Trump in one of the previous sound bites we had. That said, oh, I don't know why they spend so much money on weapons and ammunition. Who's spending a lot of money on ammunition? Who else is spending a lot of money on weapons and ammunition and war? Maybe the European Union, maybe NATO, maybe the United States. We're going to go up to, he's bragging about $1 trillion defense budget next year. You have the Europeans bragging about an $800 billion rearm program. You have German troops moving into the Baltic areas there and talking about how they're going to defend NATO further. And so they're physically moving combat troops up near the border of Russia. You have the U.S. general talking about taking out Kaliningrad. Listen, what does that sound like to you? What would that sound like to you if it was in reverse? Again, we'll say Mexico or Diego Garcia, someone else talking about doing all those things to us, spending all that money. Sounds like they're getting ready for war. Now, if you have this fantasy about thinking, well, that will cause them to back down, that never works. It certainly isn't working here. You have the opposite. It just makes Russia build up stronger. And let's take a look at some of the details here about what we're trying to get, what we're trying to make things happen here. And what do you think the response is going to be? And I'm talking about reality, not the fantasy that you want, which is the slumped shoulders and the compulsory submission to whatever it is Jack Keane wants, but the reality. Well, let's take a look at that. So Russia has been deepening its ties with China. Lavrov just earlier today talked about how that India, China, Russia, Turkey, and Iran, all these countries represent great civilizations with centuries of history, and their civilization ties cannot be broken. You don't see this kind of continuity elsewhere in the world, but it's a defining feature of the Eurasian continent. And Russia talking about how they continue to expand with their partners here and in the region and also in the global south. You saw with BRICS. I told you it's expanding economic bloc that's gaining more and more people. So if you think you're going to isolate Russia, not likely to happen, especially specifically on the BRICS. We also have Russia has already signed an agreement with the DPRK, North Korea. They're continuing to deepen. In fact, Putin's heading to actually, the Russian Sergei Shoigu was just in North Korea. I think Lavrov was there also. They signed some additional agreements and they're continuing cooperation. There is more reports that up to 30,000 more North Korean troops could now, after they've been trained by the trainer, which is what we speculated at the time, those 10,000 came to Kursk, that they would then go back and then retrain their own forces. And now it looks like 30,000 of the newly trained troops may be headed to the Russian side and to fight additionally, not in Russian territory in Kursk, but on the line of contact inside of Ukraine. That's expanding. Then Putin is heading to China in September. They continue to talk about how their relationships are deepened. They're going to celebrate the end of World War II in Asia, the Chinese version of their May 9th celebration. Putin's heading there for that. So obviously their relationships continue to advance. And then the Russian industry now on the domestic front, and because of a lot of that interaction internationally, that allows them to do this. It's expanding still. It's not just that they retooled a lot of their industry, they have, but they're continuing to expand it in pretty significant ways. In fact, here, CNN a couple of days ago had some satellite imagery that showed that actually there's a lot going on with that military. Let's see, Gary, could you put that first full screen up there? I think it's military review, was it? Or Military Watch. Yeah, Military Watch magazine came out, and they're talking about what a lot of things that were revealed by the CNN images, showing that they have a massive expansion of the Russian kamikaze drone factory. So they have all the things that they need in terms of the supply chains, the resources, the inputs, and now they are physically building out significant additional factories. In fact, some of the satellites there, Gary, if you can show that first one, this is one location. This is from satellite imagery. That's an entire complex, folks. That's not just one building here. Those are a whole series of new construction going on to massively increase the amount of drones. And these are primarily the high-end drones, the Guarantees, the modified Shaheeds that they initially got from Iran. Now then, you see that not only are they already in full-scale operation, but they're expanding it. And in fact, here's a closer look of one. You can see here. You see that these are by themselves. Each building is very, very large. And so you can imagine how much operations that are going to be able to be done in that. And then you have on top of that right now, overnight again, there was another 300 and something drone attacks by the Shahed/Garans and missiles over Ukraine that continue to hit key areas like that. You see it's coming in every night now. As many as 701 barrage. This one here was, I believe, a little over 300, and they kind of rounding back and forth between those. That's going on all the time. Now then, you see those satellite imagery of what's coming next, and you see that they're not ramping anything down. If anything, this could be up, and I've seen some estimates suggest that by the end of the year, Russia could be producing, meaning out the door, up to 2,000 of these per day. So that means that they're going to have the ability to increase this not from 300 to 700, but over 1,000 per day, 1,500 per day, maybe 2,000. And if that continues on, then the number can keep going on. Nobody can survive that kind of onslaught indefinitely. At some point, that has to have a potential to break the place, especially when you consider everything going on along the front lines. And as I've been showing you in several recent episodes, the front line, the entire Eastern Front hinges on Pokrovsk. I mean, it's like you can literally look at a map and see an actual hinge forming. And if Russia is able to take that one on the ground, along with this expansion in the air, the Ukraine army might not even be able to sustain itself through the rest of this year, much less anything beyond that. Meanwhile, you have on the Ukraine side, Julian Rupka in a recent X post said that the Russian invasion army has entered Dnipropetrovsk, so another oblast, via a third location. So now 3 different places they've gotten into the Dnipro region. And sobering to see Ukraine constructed massive dragon teeth lines, anti-tank ditches throughout the villages, but then left them unmanned and lost them. That tells you, that confirms to you that the Ukrainian military continues to fray. We've been talking about this for months now, and it seems to be escalating and picking up speed, that they even where they have built up defensive fortifications, dragon teeths, and trench lines, they don't have the personnel to man them. So they're continuing to get even thicker here. And now you talk about these sanctions here, right? That's what Jack Keane is talking about, escalation. That's what Lindsey Graham is lusting after. That's what Trump is apparently promising that he's going to do here in 10 to 12 days. What has that done so far? According to Business Insider, today, Russia's economy is now so militarized, it may keep expanding its army even after the Ukraine war. And part of that, I think the heart of that article there admits that Russia's economy appears sustainable for the next few years. CSIS, that's their Center for Strategic and International Studies analysis, wrote they forecast that the Kremlin could maintain its war of attrition through at least 2027. So the Russian, with all the inputs necessary, both the physical, economic, military, and personnel, they can continue to wage a war of attrition through the next year and the following year, through those years. So 2 full years beyond that. So 2.5 years from now, basically, they continue. Having become the most sanctioned country in the world, Russia has managed to maneuver around many economic constraints, keeping revenues from energy sales high and its budget balanced. Boy, wouldn't that be something? We can't even fantasize about that. Investing in the military and defense industry, ramping up domestic production of weapons and equipment, and boosting economic growth, wrote the think tank analysis. So what you have there is that the Ukraine side is getting weaker, the Russian side is getting stronger, and even according to Western analysis, they can continue to do this for 2.5 more years at least. And of course, we'll see what happens beyond that. That they have made, the Russians have made themselves basically sanctions proof. Not that you needed another study to tell you that. I mean, for crying out loud. You had the Biden administration, pounding its fist on its desk and talking about how we were going to harm Russia with the Secretary of Defense, Austin, former Secretary of State Blinken talking about how, we're going to rally this 50 nations against Russia and we're going to bury them on the front lines and all the equipment that we can give them. You had Biden himself saying we're going to cripple the Russian economy. We're going to devastate them. And then it's our side that's been weakened economically. Now, Russia's growth last year was like 4%, 4 point something percent, depending on which forecast you want to look. Europe was about, 1% as a block. Some countries are in economic recession. The Russian economy itself is suffering from high inflation right now, and their growth is slated to slow down. I think the last quarter was 1 point something percent, so it's definitely slowed down. But you see that it can sustain itself. They haven't suffered at all yet, and if they need to, they can suffer a lot. If you know anything about the Russians historically, if they feel it's something that they need to do, their population will suffer. They haven't so far. Putin doesn't want to get there, but even that, their growth is now down to the same thing as the West is, and in some places it's even less. But you see that these think tanks are saying, look, because of all these sanctions we've done and because we have forced Russia into finding alternative means for economic viability, and because they have, within their own borders, this massive country with all these natural resources it needs, you can't sanction them into a situation to compel them to do something. So sorry, General Keane. Sorry, Senator Graham. Sorry, President Trump. If you think that all of these things that you're alleging you're going to do in 10 to 12 days, and who can trust that number anyway, is that's going to, quote, force Putin to the negotiating table, you are weird, because they're already at the negotiating table. They continue to say, we'll have diplomatic activity, as they've said throughout. I mean, there's really no change in what they've been saying from the outset. So this is not going to compel this comparatively tiny little thing. I'm sure it wouldn't be good if it works, because then you also have, by the way, is India going to be sitting passively by on this? Is China going to sit passively by on this if you apply these kinds of sanctions and secondary sanctions and tariffs? History says no. China, we already have some experience. That harmed our economy pretty badly. And then that kind of was the impetus for moving back in the opposite direction. Trump's still having trouble trying to negotiate trade deals with a lot of countries. And I think he just signed something with the European Union. We'll see how that one goes. But then, China, you want to put a new one on there going back? China's already showed that they will have countermeasures. India, I can't even imagine the possibility that they're going to simply say, all right, if that's the way it is, I guess we're going to cut off Russia, because then that's going to harm India, and India's not going to harm India. So the idea that this stuff's even going to work, much less it's going to have an impact on Russia, is just absurd at face value. And the more you analyze it, the more research you do, the less likely it is that it's going to work. So then one has to ask, what is the objective here? What is the goal? What are we trying to get accomplished with all of this? Are we trying to literally end the war? Because this isn't going to do it. Are we going back to the Biden era? Are we just trying to harm Russia? That's not effective. That didn't work before. It certainly didn't work. And now they're getting stronger. Their military is far stronger and more capable and more experienced than it was in 2022. So that has radically backfired. And is it? It's hard for me to even fill in any more blanks. I don't even know what we could hope. If there's no rational path to compel Russia to do what we want, if there's no rational path to compel other countries to do what we want in order to harm Russia, then what are you trying to do here? Jack Keane talked about confrontation. Look, all that you're going to get done with that is increase the risk that this war could expand. And I already talked to you about how the West is talking very militarily coercive against Russia, like with the Kaliningrad situation. They're taking action. Chancellor Merz from Germany also had some very provocative things to say about Russia when he talked about the deployment of their brigade, part of an armored division, into the Baltic areas a few months back. And then now you see Russia building up these drone factories, massive increase in those. And as I understand, that's one location and the only one. And a lot of things are increasing elsewhere. That was literally just in one geographic location. You can imagine that there's a lot going on elsewhere too. They have diversified and strengthened their economy. And so where do you think this is going to go? Because everything we have done so far has worked counter to our own interests. And there's almost the only bad place it could go left is for this to expand and get into a conflict between the United States or the West and Russia. And then God help us all, because the opportunity for escalation into armored conflict with nuclear weapons is all too real. And one of the things that has concerned me from day one, I thought maybe we had dodged a bullet in 2022, because apparently Russia, according to several released information, both classified and other sources, has said that Russia was close to contemplating tactical nuclear weapons use when they suffered two big losses in Kherson and Kharkiv regions. But they didn't. We passed that, and then Russia got stronger after that. They withstood all the conventional attack from Ukraine in 2023, and then it's been on this slow, methodical move forward. I had kind of hoped that finally would cause the West to see reason and reality, even more so. We would just see, it doesn't matter what we want, that you can't physically manifest it on the field. We've tried everything. We've done everything, economic, diplomatic, military. None of it has worked. Russia's moving forward, just continuing on this, they get stronger, and you're not going to be able to sanction them away. We know that's not going to work. Militarily, over time, they're going to end up just crushing Ukraine like a tin can and eventually killing so many more people. So let's end this right now, this ugly defeat. Let's just call it a day, learn some lessons, limit our exposure, limit our damage, and then let's move on. That's what should be happening. It's not. And it's not just Jack Keane. It's not just Lindsey Graham. There's all kinds of folks all over. I think probably Keir Starmer was the happiest person in Europe right now, because I think they feel like they have compelled Trump and coerced him to come to their side. I don't know what they're trying to accomplish either, because it's hard for me to find a rational path other than just the perpetuation of conflict. I mean, you can be cynical and say, well, it's just about weapons production and the elite making more money. That has to be a part of it. I don't know if that's actually the plan. I don't have enough information. You can certainly give some credibility to the possibility that that's part of the intent. We'll continue to monitor that too. But we've got some great guests for you later on today, though. We did this kind of impromptu just because the comment happened here, but we have a great one on today. Colonel Jacques Beau. We were already going to talk about some of the Russia-Ukraine stuff. Now we have his expertise in this area. He's going to be talking to us a bit about what's actually happening behind the front lines in Ukraine. Not going to want to miss that on its own accord, but I can't wait to hear what he's got to say about some of these things here. That's at 12 o'clock Eastern, about 45 minutes from now. So be sure and tune back in to Colonel Jacques. Also, as a reminder, we are on podcasting. Let your friends know, because I know a lot of people actually prefer podcast to video. So we appreciate all you guys watching here. But let your friends know, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict, and they can just type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive and find us there. And by the way, Gary wants to talk to you about a new opportunity that we have, because we're expanding in also to the written realm. Gary, what
Danny?
Our Substack?
Yeah, well, this is great for all our viewers. It's funny. For example, my wife does not care about YouTube that much, and she always listens to podcasts. I don't understand.
Wait, come on, man! You can't tell her.
I know.
Public.
No, she'd rather listen to you than watch you. Well, Danny,
okay,
no offense, but anyway, that's just the reality. So just for all our viewers, when you want to turn your friends on to what we're doing here, and they're not ones to sit down and watch video, but they can go obviously listen to podcasts on Spotify and the other outlets, Apple, iPod, Applecasts. We also wanted to go into Substack also, and this is for more people. Maybe they prefer to read a little bit. Yeah. So what the advantage here is for people that would prefer to just get their information by reading. That's exactly what is provided here. So Danny, even on occasion, will even write some concise op-eds in relation to what's been talked about in the episode. So you'll see, we post the videos at Substack also, but then down below you'll see either a summary or an op-ed written by Danny as to what he just talked about, in this case, with Larry kind of thing. So it's just a great opportunity for for people that they're not, our friends don't always watch YouTube. So here's just another venue for all our audience, and tell your friends about it. And they just go to danieldavisdeepdive.substack.com, and you can get your fill and tell your friends about it.
Yeah, and that's it. And we've noticed that there's different really constituencies out there. Some people only want to watch videos. Some people only want to read. Some people only want to listen. So we're trying to diversify our offerings to make more people have an ability to get a hold of this. So be sure to share that. But we appreciate you guys, whatever means you're watching. We always do value that. So thank you very much. And we'll look forward to seeing you in about now 40 minutes or so from now with Colonel Jacques Beau on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.